How do you catch a robber if the person you're looking for never actually existed? This question haunted the investigators from the moment they began piecing together the aftermath of a meticulously planned heist tied to the Yakuza. The theft itself was significant, but what truly unsettled those working the case was the identity they pursued, a name that, despite exhaustive searches, led only to an elaborate void. Every lead, every document, every address connected to the suspect appeared flawless on the surface. Yet, none of it pointed to a real individual. The team started with the obvious, tracing the suspect's background. They pulled records from government databases, scoured residential listings, and cross-checked employment histories. Each record was legitimate, seemingly verified by official channels. The suspect's passport was real, the driver's license valid, and the bank accounts active. Even the home address corresponded to a functioning apartment in a quiet neighborhood. But when officers tried to locate the person behind these credentials, they found only silence. Neighbors claimed never to have seen the suspect, co-workers had no memory of them, and surveillance footage showed no trace of their presence. The more the investigators dug, the deeper the mystery grew. It wasn't a matter of mistaken identity or a case of someone using stolen papers. The layers of authenticity were too precise, too consistent. The suspect's entire existence seemed constructed from the ground up, yet perfectly integrated into the system. Every digital footprint, every official stamp, every signature had been carefully fabricated to pass scrutiny. The identity was a perfect illusion. This realization shifted the focus of the investigation. The crime scene, the stolen goods, the connections to the Yakuza, these were tangible and clear. But the person responsible for orchestrating the robbery had effectively dissolved into thin air. The question became less about who committed the crime and more about how someone could erase themselves so thoroughly. The disappearance wasn't an afterthought or a desperate escape. It was the central element of the plan. This story is not about violence or chaotic chases. It's not about high-speed pursuits or dramatic showdowns. Instead, it revolves around a calculated vanishing act, a deliberate erasure from every record and memory. The most impressive aspect of this crime wasn't the robbery itself, but the engineered absence that followed. In a world where identity is supposed to anchor accountability, someone had found a way to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The hunt for a suspect who never existed had only just begun. As we delve deeper into this case, you'll encounter more stories where robbers craft new identities with meticulous precision, slipping through the cracks of official records and fading into the shadows of anonymity. Here, each episode uncovers the methods behind these carefully constructed deceptions, exploring how criminals manipulate systems designed to confirm identity and trace movements. Following this channel allows you to stay informed about these elusive figures, the rare moments when their facades crack, and the investigative steps taken to bring clarity to their hidden lives. In the intricate dance between concealment and pursuit, understanding the techniques used to erase oneself becomes crucial. It's not merely about tracking stolen goods or catching suspects in the act. It's about piecing together fragments of falsehoods and tracing patterns within the silence they leave behind. This channel offers a detailed examination of cases where identity itself becomes a weapon, and the pursuit is as much about unraveling fabrications as it is about justice. Continuing with our investigation, the evidence collected so far points toward a network of fabricated identities, each designed to misdirect and delay discovery. Surveillance footage, digital footprints, and witness accounts all yield inconsistencies that hint at a larger scheme. As we sift through these clues, the challenge lies in distinguishing truth from carefully planted deception. The suspect's ability to vanish without a trace highlights vulnerabilities in the systems meant to prevent such disappearances. By studying these cases, we gain insight into how false identities are constructed and maintained, revealing the gaps that enable criminals to operate under the radar. It's a complex puzzle where every piece matters, and every detail could be the key to uncovering what lies beneath the surface. The operational framework surrounding the Yakuza creates a criminal environment uniquely conducive to disappearances, particularly those involving calculated crimes like robberies executed with the explicit intention of vanishing. Unlike more bureaucratic or hierarchical organized crime groups, the Yakuza structure is defined less by rigid documentation and more by fluid, informal recognition and an institutionalized culture of silence. This environment, far from romanticized depictions, is a system designed to obscure identities, fragment personal histories, and erase traces of individual involvement once an operation concludes. Central to this system is the concept that names and identities function as transient tools rather than fixed, verifiable markers. Within Yakuza circles, an individual's official name may rarely be used or recorded. Instead, aliases, nicknames, or temporary identifiers are common, often assigned based on the role a person occupies at a specific time or the group to which they have provisional affiliation. This practice is not merely a matter of convenience, but a strategic feature to limit traceability. When an individual operates under multiple temporary identities, any attempt to link them to past actions is complicated by the absence of consistent personal data. This fluidity is reinforced by the group's operational reliance on informal recognition. Membership or association is often validated through word of mouth, personal introductions, or symbolic gestures rather than formal paperwork or registries. This lack of centralized documentation means that internal knowledge of who remains fragmented and localized. The implication is clear. If someone disappears from one faction or neighborhood, no comprehensive record exists elsewhere to track them. This decentralized acknowledgement system facilitates a seamless shedding of old roles and the adoption of new ones without official record or external verification. Silence, or code of silence, is another critical element. It serves not only as an ethical boundary within the organization, but as a practical security measure. Members and affiliates are trained to avoid unnecessary disclosure, especially regarding identities, transactions, or movements. This cultural norm limits the flow of information both inside and outside the group. As a result, investigative efforts are hindered by an internal firewall of silence that protects individual identities and operational details. When combined with transient roles and absent documentation, this silence forms an almost impenetrable barrier to tracing a person's path once they decide to vanish. The operational roles themselves are often designed to be disposable. Individuals are assigned specific tasks, such as planning or executing a robbery, with the understanding that their involvement is temporary and compartmentalized. After completing their role, there is little incentive or method for maintaining ongoing association or identity continuity. This compartmentalization reduces risk for the group as a whole and enables individuals to sever ties cleanly. Additionally, because roles lack permanent records, the transition from active participant to ghost-like absence is operationally feasible. Together, these structural and cultural factors create an environment where a person can meticulously plan a crime, carry it out, and then disappear without leaving a reliable trail. The absence of formal documentation, the use of multiple temporary identities, the reliance on informal recognition, the enforced silence, and the disposable nature of roles operate synergistically to erase any stable identity behind the crime. This system does not rely on myth or legend, but on practical measures that fragment personal histories and frustrate law enforcement's attempts at connection and continuity. This reality explains why disappearances following criminal acts within the Yakuza environment are not anomalies, but expected outcomes. The infrastructure is built to facilitate such vanishings, making it entirely plausible for someone to commit a significant robbery and simply cease to exist in any verifiable sense. The structural design ensures that the individual was never meant to be found, underlining the cold, calculated efficiency of this shadowy world. Understanding these mechanisms is essential for any investigative effort seeking to penetrate the layers of obfuscation and silence that characterize these disappearances. He moved through life as if he were a shadow slipping between cracks in the pavement, noticeable only by the absence he left behind. There was no birthplace on record, no birth certificate filed under his name that corresponded to any fixed location. The official documents he possessed were issued under names that changed with the seasons, each identity as ephemeral as the last. His existence was deliberately fragmented, a mosaic of brief encounters and transient dwellings designed to resist assembly. No address could be pinned to him for more than a few weeks. Postmarks on letters, if any ever reached him, were scattered across cities and states. His mail forwarded tirelessly until it dissolved into the system's blind spots. This was not happenstance, but a pattern of deliberate erasure. His employment history was equally evasive. He never held a position long enough to leave a lasting record. Jobs were short-term contracts, day labor gigs, or freelance assignments paid in cash and unreported to any agency. This was a strategic choice. Each role a temporary mask, each paycheck a silent transaction outside the watchful eyes of databases and tax authorities. Where others might build resumes or professional networks, he built gaps. No LinkedIn profiles, no social media accounts, no digital footprints that could be tracked or analyzed. His online presence was a void, a deliberate absence maintained through careful avoidance of any platform that demanded verification or left a trail. Relationships followed the same transient logic. There were no long-term attachments, no friends who could vouch for him beyond the moment, no familial ties that tethered him to a place or history. He was not a man who sought connection. Instead, he cultivated distance. Interactions were functional and fleeting, designed to fulfill immediate needs without creating threads that might later be pulled. In this way, he became not a person but a series of passing moments, a silhouette against the backdrop of countless others whose lives were more easily traced. This pattern of disappearance was not accidental or born of neglect. It was a calculated architecture of non-existence. He understood better than most that the safest identity is one impossible to follow backward. Every choice reflected a conscious effort to erase history at every step. No fixed home, no permanent job, no lasting attachments. He lived deliberately outside the conventional structures of record-keeping and surveillance, a ghost in the machinery of modern life. His absence was a presence in itself, a signal that he was not to be found by ordinary means. The robbery was never the starting line of his plan, it was the culmination. Years of carefully constructed invisibility led to that moment, where the final piece fell into place. The heist was not a spontaneous act of desperation, but the last calculated move in a long game of vanishing. It was designed to provide the resources and the distraction necessary to cross the final threshold from shadow to non-existence. Every step before it, every transient job, every rented room, every erased record, had been preparation for this exit. The robbery was the key to the door that led out of the system entirely. Understanding the robber means recognizing this absence as a deliberate state of being. He was not merely missing. He was methodically unmade. His trail was a series of dead ends and false leads, a labyrinth constructed to confound pursuit. This was a man who had lived as a void long before the robbery, shaping his existence around the principle that the safest place to be is where no one can look. The heist was not a beginning but a final act of disappearance, the closing chapter of a carefully engineered escape from every history, every record, every tether. The false identity crafted for the robbery was a masterclass in minimalism and precision, purpose-built to serve a fleeting moment rather than an extended life. It was never meant to be a new skin to wear indefinitely. Instead, it was a carefully constructed mask designed to be discarded without trace. The documents and credentials assembled were just enough to navigate the necessary checkpoints. A temporary key to open doors, but nothing that would invite scrutiny or demand prolonged verification. At its core, the identity consisted of a name, a date of birth, and a backstory intentionally bland and unremarkable. It bore no distinctive traits or elaborate history that might invite questions. The paperwork was genuine enough to pass a cursory check, but sparse enough that a deep dive would reveal gaps. A driver's license with a forged but plausible issuing state, a social security number carefully selected from dormant sequences, and a rental agreement for an unassuming apartment formed the backbone of this ephemeral existence. Employment records existed only as a brief contract with a low-profile temp agency, enough to suggest activity without anchoring the identity in any long-term relationship. The construction of this identity hinged on routine that felt natural but was inherently fragile. It allowed the individual to move through daily life with just enough credibility to avoid raising alarms, checking in at a local gym, picking up groceries with a credit card linked to a temporary account, and renting a car under the assumed name. Each element was calibrated to create the illusion of normalcy for the shortest possible duration, a fleeting flash of presence on the grid before vanishing again. There were no social media profiles, no family ties, no digital footprints that might extend the life of the persona beyond its immediate use. This identity was never intended to support a future life or to become a permanent refuge. It lacked the depth and continuity required to build relationships, careers, or histories. Its design was antithetical to permanence. It was a scaffold erected quickly and dismantled just as swiftly. The choice of mundane details and the avoidance of any distinctive narrative ensured that once abandoned, the identity would cease to exist not only in fact but in memory. It was a deliberate act of erasure, a tool to sever ties rather than forge new ones. The ultimate goal was never to live as someone else. There was no aspiration to adopt a new persona or to build a substitute life. Instead, the objective was to stop existing entirely, to become a ghost slipping through the cracks of bureaucracy and surveillance. The false identity was a means to an end, a transient vessel carrying the individual through a perilous moment before dissolving into nothingness. It was a final act of disappearance, not a rebirth. This approach aligned seamlessly with a broader pattern of deliberate unmaking that defined the man's disappearance. Every step was calculated to reduce his footprint until it was indistinguishable from noise. The false identity was a critical piece in this puzzle, functional enough to facilitate movement and interaction, but fragile enough to be discarded without consequence. It embodied the paradox at the heart of shadow crimes, the art of being present long enough to vanish completely, leaving behind no one to chase, no one to remember. In the end, the false identity was less a new face and more a blank slate, a temporary pause in existence designed to end the story rather than begin a new chapter. It was a carefully engineered exit strategy, a tool to erase not just a name, but a life. The man behind it never sought to be found, never sought to be someone else. He sought only to become no one at all. The true challenge was never in the act itself, but in all the moments leading up to it. The invisible hours spent watching and waiting, the quiet observations that revealed far more than any brief encounter ever could. The robbery, when it finally unfolded, was merely the final flicker of a carefully kindled plan. Every step before that had been about shaping conditions so precisely that the disappearance would slip through unnoticed, like a shadow melting into the folds of dusk. Choosing the right target was a matter of subtlety, not spectacle. It wasn't about the value of what was taken, but the predictability of the environment. Human behavior, with all its comforting routines and habitual rhythms, provided the blueprint. The man observed patterns. When doors opened, when footsteps echoed down hallways, when eyes briefly lifted from screens or turned away in habitual distraction. These moments, small and repetitive, formed a grid of opportunity. The target wasn't just a place or a person. It was a moment carved out of time, a slice of predictability where the unexpected could be most easily hidden. Timing was everything. The plan demanded patience, a willingness to wait for the precise intersection of absence and silence. There was no urgency, no rush to snatch what might be grabbed in a heartbeat and run. Instead, the man moved with deliberate restraint, knowing that any misstep could ripple outward and unravel the fragile web of invisibility he was weaving. The robbery itself was a quiet whisper in a long conversation, a brief punctuation in a story written over days and weeks. This was not about confrontation or force. Avoiding interaction was not just courteous, it was essential. Every decision was made to minimize the chance of recognition, of disturbance, of leaving behind a trace. The plan was designed to dissolve into the background, to become indistinguishable from the everyday flow of life. The disappearance was the true objective. The theft was only a means to an end, a tool to facilitate the vanishing act. In that sense, the theft was almost incidental. It was a necessary distraction, a way to create confusion without creating chaos. The man knew that confusion was his ally, that by sowing uncertainty about what had been taken, he could better obscure what had truly vanished. The goal was never to steal something valuable in the conventional sense, but to engineer a gap in perception. The missing object was a decoy, a marker pointing away from the real absence. No improvisation was allowed. The plan demanded exactitude and calm. The man's restraint was deliberate, a quiet force that held the unraveling threads together. Each step was measured, each movement rehearsed in the mind long before it was executed. This was not a crime of impulse, but one of calculation, an exercise in patience that stretched time itself until the moment was ripe. In the end, the disappearance was protected not by speed or boldness, but by subtlety and control. The man's careful orchestration ensured that no one would chase shadows or stumble over clues. The robbery was the easiest part, a simple act made invisible by the careful shaping of everything that came before it. It was in the planning, watching, waiting, understanding that the true art lay. Only through that quiet mastery could the man truly become no one at all, slipping out of existence without a trace, leaving behind only questions and silence. The operation unfolded with deliberate precision, each movement measured and unremarkable. The man entered the premises at a time chosen to avoid any unnecessary contact, passing through the entrance without hesitation or pause. No words were exchanged, no attention drawn. The presence was as unnoticeable as any passerby would be. His actions followed a predictable pattern, one that mirrored ordinary behavior rather than standing out as suspicious or hurried. Inside, the environment remained undisturbed. No objects were displaced beyond what was necessary, and the layout retained its original order. The man accessed the targeted area with quiet efficiency, avoiding any unnecessary handling or interaction. Nothing was left out of place, no signs of forced entry or hurried searching. The entire sequence was executed with an absence of flourish, a deliberate avoidance of personal expression. Throughout the process, the man's demeanor remained neutral, devoid of urgency or hesitation. There was no glance over the shoulder, no sign of nervousness or excitement. The operation was a task, a series of steps completed methodically without deviation. His movements were neither fast nor slow, but consistent and unobtrusive, blending seamlessly into the background of the location. No communication occurred, verbal or otherwise. The man did not engage with any individuals present, nor did he leave messages or signals. There was no trace of familiarity or recognition in his behavior. At no point did he reveal himself through mannerisms, speech, or identifiable habits. The absence of signature was intentional, part of the design to ensure the operation left no personal imprint. The items targeted were selected precisely, removed with care, but without hesitation. There was no unnecessary handling, no exploration beyond the intended objective. Each step was planned to minimize disturbance, avoiding any actions that might generate noise or attract attention. The man's focus remained singular, maintaining control over the environment without allowing it to influence his conduct. Upon completion, the man exited the premises by the same route, retracing steps with equal discretion. No hurried movements or abrupt changes in pace occurred. The departure mirrored the entry in its calm and unassuming nature. No objects were carried in a way that would draw notice, and no physical marks were left behind. The scene remained as it had been found, save for the absence of the targeted items. No evidence of identification was left at the scene. The man wore clothing and used tools that bore no distinctive marks or features. No fingerprints, fibers, or other physical traces linked to a specific individual were left behind. Surveillance footage, if present, showed only a figure whose details were obscured or indistinct, offering nothing beyond a generic silhouette. The entire episode was a quiet interruption, one that neither disturbed the routine nor invoked alarm beyond the immediate recognition of loss. No unusual behavior preceded or followed the event. There were no delays, no mistakes, no signs of struggle or resistance. The operation concluded cleanly, leaving behind an empty space where something once was, and no further indication of the actor who had caused the change. In its aftermath, the scene held only the absence, a void that spoke to what had been taken but revealed nothing about who had taken it. The man's presence was erased as thoroughly as it had been exerted. There was no narrative beyond the simple fact of the missing objects, no personal story embedded in the shadows left behind. The robbery existed as an event without character, a quiet removal that dissolved into the fabric of the ordinary. After the robbery, there was no grand exit, no frantic dash into the night, no flash of sudden wealth or conspicuous indulgence. The man simply vanished, not with a bang, but with a silence so complete it seemed as though he had never been there at all. The identity he had inhabited ceased to exist in every traceable form. Addresses once linked to him fell into disuse. Phone numbers went unanswered. Online profiles, accounts, and financial transactions stopped cold, as if the digital footprints themselves had been washed clean by an unseen tide. This wasn't a disappearance marked by desperation or flight. It was a quiet withdrawal, an erasure so thorough that no active pursuit could ever gain traction. Without a person to follow, no trail to pick up, the usual mechanisms of chase and capture fell flat. In the absence of movement, the hunt lost its purpose. There was no figure sprinting through crowds, no getaway car speeding down empty streets. Instead, there was only the gradual fading of a thread, a quietly severed connection that left behind an empty space where a life had been. Such disappearances are far more effective than any dramatic escape. The world is designed to notice action, running footsteps, glaring headlights, frantic calls. But when someone stops acting entirely, when they simply dissolve into the background, they become almost invisible. Law enforcement agencies and investigators rely on patterns, contacts, and transactions to build a picture and track a subject. Remove those elements, and the puzzle becomes unsolvable. The absence of evidence is itself a barrier. Without a living, breathing target, resources are redirected and interest wanes. This kind of vanishing act requires a different kind of skill, patience, calculated restraint, and a deep understanding of how systems detect and respond to anomalies. It's not about outrunning a pursuer, but about slipping beneath their radar altogether. The man's disappearance was a masterclass in this approach. No calls, no messages, no social media updates, no new financial activity to spark alarms. Simply a withdrawal into nothingness. If you find yourself intrigued by cases where anonymity, false identities, and the art of disappearance play a larger role than violence or high-speed chases, you might appreciate exploring these stories further. They reveal a shadow world where power lies not in confrontation, but in the ability to erase oneself completely, and where the greatest crime is becoming untraceable. Eventually, the absence began to speak louder than any presence. The lack of movement became a signal, a quiet testament to the man's deliberate choice. No one could say where he had gone, because he had ceased to be a figure anyone could locate or define. In the wake of his disappearance, the world moved on without him, not out of neglect, but because there was nothing left to follow. No footprints remained, no personal story to unravel, only the void that remained after everything else was taken away. It's a paradox of disappearance. The more completely you vanish, the less likely you are to be pursued. A dramatic escape invites attention, sparks suspicion, and fuels investigation. But to dissolve silently, to become a ghost in the system, is to deny others the very tools they need to find you. And in that denial lies a power far beyond the reach of any conventional chase. From the outset, authorities approached the investigation with methodical precision, following every trace the suspect's existence seemed to leave behind. Initial inquiries led to official documents, birth certificates, driver's licenses, rental agreements, employment records, that all bore the hallmarks of legitimacy. Each piece of paperwork was verified through standard channels, cross-checked against databases, and subjected to thorough scrutiny. On the surface, everything appeared authentic, as if the suspect were a real individual embedded in the fabric of society. Yet, as the investigation deepened, it became clear that these leads, while credible in form, offered no tangible path to a person. Investigators were guided by established protocols designed to leverage the bureaucratic infrastructure of identity verification and record-keeping. Every name uncovered was traced through multiple registries, every address visited, every phone number dialed. The process was exhaustive and systematic, reflecting law enforcement's commitment to uncovering the truth through the tools at their disposal. However, the more leads were pursued, the more the trail dissolved into a series of documents that, though official, were effectively unmoored from any living individual. It was as if the suspect existed solely within the confines of administrative systems, a ghost composed of paper and pixels rather than flesh and blood. This phenomenon was not the result of investigative oversight, but rather the direct consequence of how the system itself operates. Modern identification frameworks are built to confirm identities through layered documentation, relying on interlocking records that reinforce each other's authenticity. In this case, that network of documents functioned flawlessly to confirm the suspect's existence on paper. But paradoxically, this very perfection obscured the absence of a real person behind the records. The system's design, intended to create certainty, produced ambiguity instead. Each document was genuine within its own context. Official stamps, notarized signatures, valid dates, and consistent personal data. The records seamlessly linked to one another, creating a coherent narrative that satisfied standard verification procedures. Yet, none of these records could be tied to verifiable physical presence. Rental properties linked to the suspect were consistently occupied, but by unrelated individuals. Employment records reference companies that either no longer existed or had no recollection of the individual. Contact information bounced back or connected only to automated systems. Even biometric data, when available, failed to correlate with any known person in law enforcement databases. The suspect's identity, while procedurally intact, was effectively a constructed facade. Authorities pursued every possible angle, consulting with data analysts, forensic document examiners, and field operatives, but the investigation remained trapped within the confines of the paper trail. The system's integrity prevented the emergence of false leads born from obvious forgery or error. Yet this same integrity also prevented the detection of deliberate erasure or dissociation from physical reality. It became apparent that the suspect's disappearance was engineered not through the subversion of systems, but through their exploitation. By existing entirely within the parameters the system was designed to validate, the suspect effectively rendered themselves invisible to conventional investigative methods. This outcome underscores a fundamental tension within institutional frameworks. Systems designed to verify and authenticate can, under certain conditions, facilitate concealment rather than disclosure. The investigative process, constrained by its reliance on documentation and official channels, navigated a labyrinth of legitimate yet ultimately hollow leads. The absence of irregularities in these records meant investigators had no procedural justification to dismiss them or to suspect fabrication at the level of systemic design. Consequently, the search for a physical individual behind the paperwork was met with silent impasses. In this light, the investigation's slow progress and lack of resolution reflect not a failure of effort or expertise, but the inherent limitations of a system operating exactly as intended. Law enforcement's reliance on bureaucratic frameworks, while essential for managing identity and accountability at scale, proved insufficient when confronted with a subject who manipulated these frameworks to erase their physical trace. The pursuit of the suspect became a pursuit of paperwork, an endless cycle of verifying documents that confirmed existence without revealing presence. Ultimately, the case illuminates how adherence to procedural rigor and system integrity, core principles of effective investigation, can paradoxically hinder resolution when the system itself is weaponized to generate untraceability. The suspect's disappearance did not expose gaps in law enforcement's capabilities, but highlighted the boundaries of what can be uncovered through institutional mechanisms alone. In this scenario, the system worked flawlessly, and that very perfection became the obstacle that prevented the case from being solved. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of footsteps echoing down the corridor. Every detail had been accounted for, every movement rehearsed countless times in the suspect's mind. Yet, as the robber sat behind the wheel of the nondescript rental car, a single, almost imperceptible hesitation flickered across his face. It was the kind of break so fleeting it could easily be dismissed, a slight misstep in the choreography of a carefully orchestrated vanishing act. Earlier that day, the plan had unfolded with near-flawless precision. The stolen goods were stashed in a hidden compartment, the alibi airtight, the digital traces wiped clean. But now, as the car idled at the curb, a peculiar sensation gnawed at him, a small detail that didn't quite fit the narrative he had meticulously constructed. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of a passerby who seemed to recognize something or someone. The look was subtle, almost casual, but it planted a seed of doubt. It wasn't the recognition itself that unsettled him. It was the inconsistency that had silently crept into the story. Earlier, when purchasing the rental car, he had used a forged license, one tied to an identity created from fragments scraped from the shadows. Yet, in his haste to maintain his cover, he had overlooked something as mundane as the timing of the transaction. The receipt, tucked carelessly in the glove compartment, bore a timestamp that conflicted with his carefully crafted timeline. It was just a few minutes off, but that was enough to raise questions if anyone were to piece it together. The robber's fingers twitched at the edge of the crumpled paper, his breathing shallow. He knew how fragile even the best-laid plans were, how a single overlooked detail could unravel everything. The tension coiled within him like a spring ready to snap. There had been no witnesses to the actual theft, no cameras capturing his face, but this minor discrepancy threatened to unravel the delicate web of deception he had spun. It was a small crack in an otherwise impenetrable facade. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows, and the night seemed to press in closer, suffocating and expectant. The passerby had moved on, blending into the flow of indifferent city life, but the robber's mind replayed the moment endlessly. Had that brief eye contact been a silent alarm? A thread that, if pulled, could lead straight to him? He forced himself to focus, to breathe, to steady the racing pulse behind his ribs. Every second stretched taut with possibility. No one had connected the dots yet. No surveillance footage, no fingerprint, no eyewitness testimony. Yet the inconsistency in the timeline was a reminder that control was always an illusion. The plan, though executed with ruthless efficiency, was balanced precariously on a knife's edge. He glanced again at the receipt, then at the dashboard clock, the subtle mismatch gnawing at him. To an outsider, it was meaningless, a forgotten scrap in a sea of evidence. But to him, it was a whisper of vulnerability, a reminder that beneath the surface of perfection lay human error, small and often invisible, but potent enough to topple empires. For now, nothing concrete had been uncovered. The discrepancy was too minor to trigger alarms, too isolated to be linked decisively. It was a near miss, a shadow flickering at the edge of the investigation, teasing the possibility of revelation without delivering it. The robber folded the receipt carefully, slipping it back beneath the seat as if trying to bury the doubt along with it. The night stretched on, the city indifferent to the tension contained within that small car. Outside, life went on, unaware how close it had come to exposing a carefully guarded secret. The plan remained intact, but the fragile balance had been shaken. A single, overlooked detail had almost pulled the mask away, and in the world of shadows and crime, that near mistake was a haunting reminder. No plan is ever truly foolproof. The flawless execution of the robbery was only the surface triumph. What truly defined this act as the perfect crime was not the seizure of goods or the evasion of immediate capture. It was the vanishing, the deliberate erasure of any trace that could lead back to the perpetrators. No fibers, no witnesses, no digital footprints. The absence of a culprit is the ultimate victory in a world where every misstep can be fatal. This was never about outsmarting the police with brute force or cunning maneuvers. It was about becoming ghosts, shadows slipping through the cracks of a city that never sleeps, leaving behind nothing but questions and silence. In the cold calculus of the Yakuza's underworld, power is measured not by the weapons brandished or the money amassed, but by the ability to dissolve into nothingness. The real weapon is anonymity, a cloak so impenetrable that it turns a criminal from a target into a myth. This disappearance is not a failure of justice, but a testament to a different kind of mastery, the mastery of invisibility. The man behind the mask never existed in the eyes of law enforcement because he chose not to exist at all. No birth certificate, no social media, no past. Just a blank space where a life should be. This is the chilling truth behind many unsolved crimes. Sometimes, it is not that the criminal is smarter or faster, but that they're simply not there. The hunt becomes an endless pursuit of a shadow. And in that endless pursuit lies the real terror. A reminder that the most disturbing crimes are those that leave no body, no confession, no closure. They haunt the edges of reality, where the line between presence and absence blurs. If the disappearance in tonight's story unsettled you, know that this is just one iteration of a deeper, darker phenomenon. There are criminals who have taken the art of vanishing even further, assuming false identities so thoroughly that they become strangers to everyone, even themselves. For those willing to peer deeper into the abyss, the next Shadow Crimes episode will reveal how these ghosts slip through the cracks after a robbery, leaving behind a trail colder than any weapon. Watch closely because some disappearances are not just perfect, they are terrifyingly complete.